few weeks ago for Toastmasters. It was on my granddad and what he did in the RAF. It's part of a history talk. And while I started researching it, I found out lots of really interesting things. And when I come to BarCamp, I always try and do a talk that's not anything to do with computers. So this is my talk that's not anything to do with computers. So my granddad was in the RAF in the Second World War. He was a policeman for the first 3 years. The police weren't called up for military service, so he kind of got out of it for a while. But then when he got to, I think, 1945, all police had to go and do their service. So he ended up in the RAF, desperate to be a pilot, but he could not land the plane, kept failing his test. So he ended up as a navigator in planes. And he actually came close to some really awesome technology for that time. And I actually started reading about it. This is just absolutely brilliant. So my granddad flew 2 different planes. He flew the Mosquitoes, which you might see here, which was a light bomber. They used to use the Mosquitoes a lot for some reconnaissance, but often they would go ahead of the main bombing force, and they would drop what they call TIs, the target indicators, which were flares which would drop on the ground, which would give the main bombing force something to aim for. And these guys also served as a bit of a sort of a night fighter as well. They could serve as a bit of a fighter aircraft. The Germans absolutely hated the Mosquito. It was like the bane of their lives and caused them a lot of trouble. It's made out of wood, a bit like the Spitfire, but the British just crunched them out so fast out of their factories, and they were the fastest plane in the world at the time. The other plane that he flew was the Halifax, which you probably can't see, but Halifax was kind of the second fiddle to the Lancaster, but there was actually a lot more of them. You couldn't see that. It's kind of a bit of an ugly plane, but a lot of the Halifax pilots were a bit hard done by because the Lancaster guys got all the credit, but they actually did a lot more bombing.
So the Rankin Cartwright production was the Lancaster after?
There were different companies. So Lancaster was the Avro, Halifax was the, someone might know the name, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. So they had different competing companies for with all these planes. So what I was going to talk to you about briefly today was actually some of the technology that was in the plane. So my granddad being the navigator. So basically these planes have 6 to 8 people in the crew. You've got the pilot, the gunners, the bomb guy, the navigator. The mosquitoes I showed you before, they could run them on a 2 crew without, if they weren't doing any bombing, they could do light runs. But most of the time we have 6 to 8. And the navigator, he had a little area just behind the main pilot, a curtained area, and he'd have a little bench, maps, protractors, all that stuff, and also some awesome tech. So they used to have a thing called, first of all they had a thing called GEE, which was, have you heard of it? Yeah, so it was basically the precursor to the GPS, and it basically worked. They would have 3 stations in the UK transmitting different modulation signals, and they would be able to triangulate the signal from that. And over the UK, over England, it was, I think, could be accurate to meters. Over Germany, it was about a mile, which was enough for bombing. So they could pinpoint their position. And the Germans actually had no idea that Brits even had this for quite a while. It wasn't until the last year of the war that they actually managed to jam it. So there was a huge advantage from this G thing. But it's one of these technologies. There was a lot of this around at the time where they pretty much were hacking around it in the lab, a bit like hackerspace, and they get it kind of working, and they stick it straight in the planes and go for it. So I think a lot of the master bombers would trial on all this technology because they were the guys that were basically going ahead and leading the pack. And so G was another one. They also had some really cool radar. So they had a thing called H2S, and the Americans had a variant of it as well, with H2 something else. H2X. So that was the air-to-ground radar, which was again way ahead of its time. One of these things that was just cranked out, continually improving it. They had another one which was codenamed Fish Pond, which was the air-to-air, which was for tracking being able to detect night fighters, people attacking them in the air. So my granddad was probably messing around. He didn't talk a lot about it when he was alive. I found out a lot about this after he died. But he was probably had all this tech at his hands. They obviously did a lot of stuff with protractors, slide rules and things like that, but they also had little computers. They had this thing called the Thornton computer, which they used to use for calculating, I believe this is right, well, I can't find any references to it. They used it for calculating wind drift and things like that. So they would have a lead bomber. They would go out there. So the meteorology would they kind of know what the weather was sort of going to be for the mission. But the lead guy would go out. He would measure the actual wind speeds and things like that from the plane, and then they'd make adjustments on the computer, send data back to the main base by Morse code, and they would then transmit that back out to the other planes, and they would adjust all their navigations based on the measurements of the lead guy, so that they wouldn't have to all make those measurements. So they had some pretty awesome stuff happening, and the other bits of tech which is quite cool. It's really horrible because this killed lots and lots of people, but the things they did with the bombs as well, and the way they had they did lots of really amazing things in a very short period of time for technology to actually jump ahead. And meanwhile, the Germans were doing crazy stuff with jet engines and all sorts of stuff as well. Didn't actually make it into active service. A lot of it, they found out a lot of these things after the war. So all the rockets and all that sort of stuff that helped NASA get to the moon, all that was all being done around that time. And if you have a look on the net, you can find this crazy footage of all these experimental jet fighters they had and things, which looked really unstable when they started. Have you seen them? The little one? I can't remember the name of it. It just looks really odd as it's taking off. It looks like a remote control plane almost.
Wasn't there one twin-engine jet briefly made in the war?
Maybe, yeah. I didn't actually know much about it until recently when I researched this, but maybe Ryan knows about it.
I think the Germans, because Germans were into jets as well.
Yeah, no, it was a German one.
Yeah.
But the navigation stuff was really that sparked my interest, and I had no idea they had like a GPS, which is like it was based on radio signals, but it was ground based. It was a satellite, so they were triangulate from 3 points off on the coast of England, and that's why the accuracy wasn't that great over Germany, because you like going out to the point, but it would triangulate the signals. I've seen like oscilloscope pictures of the signals. They had like different pulse modulations on them, and they would basically, that's how they would find their position using this thing. But I think it was pretty rough, but it worked. And if it didn't work, then so be it. They maybe died or whatever, but they're probably going to die anyway. So so it sort of links back to what I was saying. I talked this morning about FedEx Day and doing things quick, and they do a lot of stuff. Like they say, we probably advanced like 50 years technology in 5 years, because there was that emphasis on, well, people are going to die if you don't do this, and then just crunch things out and try them and do short iterations, and they would trial things very quickly, and some people might die from it, but what you got to lose, just go for it. So it's an interesting period. Oh well, he was pretty much, this is another story, but he was involved in the big civilian bombings in Dresden, Hamburg, Cologne, all those that killed lots of people, and he was pretty scarred by that actually. He never talked about his war experience until his deathbed.
Was on Fair Miles and PNG in the Solomons. And he never heard his about it at all.
Well, Grandad gave his wings to me just one day, just went, I don't want him. He just didn't want anything to do with it. So we have a diary entry, some diary entries, and we have some an interview I did with my sister as a school project, just quite close before he died. And that's how I pieced a lot of stuff together. I'm still trying to work out I don't even have the service number, so I'm trying to track down where he was at via, I've worked out what squadrons he was in there via some of the data, so I'm trying to get his service record from the MOD in the UK. You can actually send them all your research and they'll go and search for you. So you can do that, and then they'll send you every mission they've been on and all sorts of stuff. They've got all that data. But if you don't have the service number, everything's keyed off the service number, then you can't find it. It's fascinating stuff. But yeah, I think they're going off track here, but the pilots, or the crews, I think they were quite comfortable bombing factories, bases, all of that munition stuff. But the moment they were basically firebombing cities. They weren't even dropping bombs, they were dropping incendiaries, which were killing people in really horrible ways, and massive amounts of people. I think that was hugely unpopular, and like Dresden was very unpopular in the UK actually. That was the one that tipped it over, because people sort of saw it was, women and children half the time. But that's going off the track of my talk. But it's an interesting period, and some of the bomber crews were quite ostracised as well. Like because of that whole thing, they return home and certain people did sort of Rosh Hashanah with it as opposed to people who were doing other active service. Thank you.